It's only 4 miles. It shouldn't have taken 8 to 10 hours to get there. Even if he was only floating, it should have been a much quicker time. That's a bartender, a local, someone who knows these waters better than most people know their own neighborhood. And he's talking about the night Lynette Hooker disappeared. Her husband Brian says she fell off a dinghy, says the wind took her, says he lost sight of her in the dark. But Ken, the last person outside of Brian to see them together, did the math. And the math doesn't work. Before we get into what happened, here's what nobody can explain. 1. Where was Brian Hooker for 8 to 10 hours? 2. Why did no one at the Abaco Inn see Lynette, despite her supposedly being there for 2.5 hours? 3. Why was Lynette wearing the engine's ignition lanyard, the kill switch, when Brian was the one driving? 4. Why didn't Brian anchor the dinghy and search for her instead of paddling away? 5. Why are 2 paddleboards still strapped to the soulmate, untouched? 6. Why did Brian never mention the green cover-up Lynette was wearing, her last known outfit, to investigators? 7. Why hasn't a single trace of Lynette been found in some of the clearest, shallowest water in the Bahamas? 8. Why did Brian leave the Bahamas one day after saying finding Lynette was his sole focus, the same day her daughter arrived to search for her? 8 questions, no answers. Until now. Let's start with the most basic problem in Brian Hooker's story: time. Brian says he and Lynette left the Abaco Inn at around 7:30 in the evening on April 4th. They got into their 8-foot dinghy and headed back toward their sailboat, the Soulmate, anchored roughly 4 miles away at Aunt Pat's Bay near Elbow Cay. He says somewhere along the way, the winds picked up to around 25 miles per hour. He says Lynette fell overboard. He says he watched her swimming toward shore and then lost sight of her in the dark. He reported her missing at approximately 4 in the morning. 7:30 to 4 a.m. That's 8.5 hours. 4 miles. Fox News Digital sent a boat captain named Mo Monestein 15 years navigating these exact waters to retrace the route. By motor, it took 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Even accounting for wind, even accounting for a disabled engine, even accounting for one man paddling against a 25-mile-per-hour headwind in an 8-foot rubber dinghy, this is not an 8-hour journey. Ken put it plainly. What catches my eye is they left here at 7:30, and supposedly it happened right after they left here, and he didn't make it over there until 4 a.m. or something like that, in 25-mile-per-hour winds. It's only 4 miles that way. It shouldn't have taken 8 to 10 hours to get there. There are 8 to 10 hours in Brian Hooker's account of that night that nobody, not Brian, not his attorney, not Bahamian police, has been able to map onto a satisfactory explanation. 8 to 10 hours in 4 miles of open water with a missing woman on the other end. That is where this case begins to fracture. Now let's talk about question 2, because it connects directly to question 6, and together they form one of the most unsettling threads in this entire case. On the evening of April 3rd, the night before Lynette disappeared, Brian and Lynette were at the Abaco Inn together. They arrived at around 4:30 in the afternoon. They stayed for approximately 2.5 hours. Brian came to the bar, he ordered 2 rum and cokes, he chatted briefly, paid by card, and sat. Lynette was supposedly there, by the pool. Ken served Brian for the entirety of those 2.5 hours and never once saw Lynette Hooker, not by the pool, not at the bar, not walking through the property, not ordering a drink, not waving, not existing in any visible way within that space. Now, here is where question 6 becomes important. The last known photograph of Lynette Hooker was taken at the Abaco Inn the following evening, April 4th, the night she disappeared, poolside, minutes before Brian and Lynette left for the dinghy. She's wearing a green cover-up, clearly visible, distinctive. Brian Hooker reportedly never mentioned that green cover-up to investigators. In a disappearance at sea, clothing is not a minor detail. It affects buoyancy. It affects drift. It affects how a body moves through a current and what search teams are scanning the water for. The color, the fabric, the weight of what someone is wearing when they enter the ocean, it matters. It's one of the first things investigators ask about. It's procedure. Brian described the night in detail in a recorded phone call to a friend obtained by CBS. He described the wind. He described the dinghy. He described watching Lynette swimming toward shore. He called what happened a, quote, cascade of failures. He did not describe what she was wearing. The green cover-up was there, in the last photograph, visible to anyone who looked. Lynette was wearing it when she walked out of the Abaco Inn and toward the dinghy. It should have been the first thing out of his mouth when police asked him, what was she wearing when she went into the water? It wasn't. This is the question that has stopped investigators cold. And it should stop you too, because once you understand what it means, technically, mechanically, practically, it is very hard to hear Brian Hooker's account of that night the same way again. An engine safety lanyard, also called a kill switch, is a cord attached to the boat's ignition. One end connects to the engine, the other clips to the wrist or life jacket of whoever is operating the vessel. If that person falls overboard, the cord pulls free and the engine cuts out immediately. That is its entire purpose. It exists to protect the operator. The operator wears it. Brian was operating the dinghy. But Brian told Bahamian police that when Lynette fell overboard, she was wearing the lanyard. She was a passenger. She was not driving the boat. She had no operational reason to be wearing the kill switch. So why was it on her wrist? Think through the possibilities carefully. If Brian was driving and Lynette was wearing the lanyard, someone put it on her. Either she put it on herself for reasons that have never been explained, or someone put it on her. And if the lanyard was on Lynette's wrist and she went into the water, then the moment she went overboard, the engine would cut out. The boat would go dead in the water. Brian would be in a disabled dinghy in a dark with no power. Which is exactly what he says happened. But here is the thing. The lanyard cutting the engine only makes sense as an accidental safety feature if the lanyard was on the operator. If the lanyard was on a passenger and that passenger went overboard and the engine cut out, what you have is a sequence of events that conveniently disables the boat at exactly the moment it would be needed most to turn around, search, rescue. Lynette's daughter, Karli Aylesworth, asked investigators the question directly. She asked why Lynette had the ignition key on her in the first place. She said she still doesn't have a satisfying answer. Nobody does. Karli Aylesworth sat down with CNN and said something that has echoed through every discussion of this case since. She said, why wouldn't he drop anchor and look for her? Why did he paddle the other way? That is the question. That is the entire question. And the fact that it still doesn't have a satisfying answer 8 days into this investigation is something that neither the Bahamian authorities nor Brian Hooker's legal team has been able to resolve. Brian says he saw Lynette swimming toward shore. He says he tried to reach her. He says the winds drove them further apart. He says he eventually had to give up and paddle toward Marsh Harbor to find help. But let's walk through what he did not do. He did not drop anchor. An anchor would have held the dinghy in place while he searched the water around him. He did not have one or did not use one. He did not call out to nearby boats. This is a busy anchorage, one of the most trafficked in the Abaco Islands. There were other vessels in the water that night. Multiple people have since said that if he had called for help, he would have gotten it. He did not stay in the vicinity of where Lynette went overboard, circling, scanning, calling her name. He paddled away toward Marsh Harbor, which is in the opposite direction from where she was last seen swimming toward shore. He described the whole night in a recorded phone call to a friend made several days later as a cascade of failures. He was calm in that call, measured, the way a person sounds when they've had time to construct a narrative, not the way a person sounds when they are still in the raw shock of having watched their spouse disappear into the ocean 72 hours ago. A cascade of failures. Not, I screamed until my voice gave out. Not, I swam after her until I couldn't. Not, I flagged down every boat I could see. A cascade of failures. Passive, inevitable sounding, like something that simply happened rather than something that anyone caused. When journalists and photographers finally got close enough to document the soulmate, the Hooker's 45-foot sailboat anchored in a cove off Marsh Harbor on Great Abaco Island, two things about that boat stood out above everything else. The first was what it looked like, a lived-in, unconventional floating home. Cookie Monster on the sail, a pirate flag off the stern reading "A Pirate's Life for Me," a Buddha statue, conch shells, an aloe plant, dumbbells on the deck. This was not a pristine charter boat. This was the home of two people who had committed fully to a life on the water, who had built something real and specific and theirs on the open sea. And sitting on the side of that boat, still strapped down, still secured, never deployed, were two paddleboards. Lynette Hooker paddleboarded constantly. It was woven into her identity. She was on the water every chance she had. She was not afraid of it. She was not weak in it. She was a fit, experienced, water-confident woman who had spent over a decade navigating open ocean. Paddleboards float. In an emergency, you grab a paddleboard. You throw a paddleboard to someone in the water. You use a paddleboard the way you use any flotation device when someone you love is going under. You get it to them fast, by any means necessary. The paddleboards were right there. They were never touched. And a local boat captain, speaking to the New York Post, offered another detail that cuts even deeper. He said about the anchorage where the soulmate was moored, "This is the calmest side of the island. There is no reason to take the dinghy out here. I've never seen anyone do it, and I've never done it. It makes no sense to take the dinghy out here." No reason to take the dinghy. No body found. Two paddleboards still strapped down. One woman gone. This brings us to the question that no one can explain, not investigators, not local experts, not anyone who has spent time in these waters. Why has nothing been found? The Bahamian authorities launched a full-scale search within hours of Brian's call. Royal Bahamas Police, Royal Bahamas Defense Force, Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue. They searched by sea, by air, by land. The U.S. Coast Guard joined with aerial assets, drone technology, professional divers. They searched for days, covering the area around Elbow Cay in the Sea of Abaco in the kind of systematic, coordinated operation that does not miss things easily. They found nothing. Not a shoe, not a piece of fabric, not the green cover-up, not a body. Mo Monesteem, 15 years on these waters, said this plainly when journalists asked him, "Not being found, that's the mystery. It is very hard to disappear because we're so close to land. So if you do fall overboard and drown, somebody will see you the next day. Again, we can see bottom. I'll be driving the boat. I will see stingrays. I will see turtles. So I would see a human body. Somebody would see something. Somebody would say something. Clear water, shallow depths, constant boat traffic, and nothing."
Now, Karli Aylesworth. Karli is Lynette's daughter. She flew to the Bahamas as soon as she could get there. She hired an attorney. She sat with Bahamian police for hours. She walked the route her mother would have walked. She stood at the Abaco Inn and looked at the pool where her mother supposedly spent 2.5 hours without being seen by anyone. She looked at the soulmate. She looked at the paddleboards. She looked at the water. This is how she found out her mother was missing. A phone call from Brian. Sunday evening, around 8:30 at night, more than 12 hours after Lynette supposedly went overboard. She told CNN. He said, like matter of fact, "Hey, your mom is missing. We don't know where she is. She's been missing since last night, but we're going to come up there soon to see you." Matter of fact. Not panicked, not breaking down. Not the voice of a man who had spent the last 12 hours in absolute terror watching his wife disappear into the ocean. Matter of fact. Like a scheduling update. Karli told CNN she was in shock, not just because of the news, but because of how it was delivered. She told investigators that her mother and Brian had a volatile relationship, that conflict between them, especially when alcohol was involved, was not uncommon. She said her mother was not someone who would simply fall off a boat, not an experienced sailor, not Lynette. She said she didn't buy the accident narrative. And then she said this, directly, without flinching. "I feel like this was probably pre-planned, if anything. It doesn't seem like just some accident." pre-planned. And then she said something else. Something that tells you exactly who Karli Aylesworth is and what she is actually asking for in this case. As long as there has been a thorough investigation into all the facts, then I'll have to live with the fact that it's an accident. But I don't think this is the end. She is not screaming for a conviction. She is asking for a real investigation. She is saying, look at everything and show me what you find. She arrived in the Bahamas ready to dig, ready to retrace, ready to demand answers, on the same day that Brian Hooker got on a plane and left. He had said the day before that finding Lynette was his sole focus. He was gone the next morning. Karli stood at the harbor. She looked at the soulmate. She looked at the paddleboards still strapped to the side. She looked at the water her mother loved. And she started asking questions that nobody has answered yet. Brian Hooker was arrested on April 8th, 4 days after Lynette disappeared. He was questioned by the Bahamian police for more than 3 hours. His attorney, Terrell Butler, confirmed that investigators were asking whether Brian had caused harm to his wife, meaning that from day 4, this was being treated as more than a boating accident. His detention was extended. He was questioned again on April 10th. Butler described the follow-up session as repetitive, the same territory, covered again, looking for the crack in the story that would let investigators get a foothold. On April 13th, he was released. No charges. The Department of Public Prosecutions recommended against charging him at that time, pending further investigation. He remained, and still remains, a named suspect in an active case. The U.S. Coast Guard opened its own criminal investigation. The State Department confirmed it was involved. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer told Newsweek that prosecuting without a body is harder but not impossible, and that the first place investigators need to look is Brian's devices. She said they need to look at his Google searches. I'll be interested to see if he Googled anything. Text messages, call logs, location data. The kind of digital trail that people leave without thinking because they don't believe anyone is watching, because they assume a device is private, because in the moment they are not thinking about evidence, they are thinking about something else entirely. That evidence, if it exists, is now in the hands of investigators. Brian Hooker denies any wrongdoing. His attorney has been consistent and clear on that point. He has not been charged. Under Bahamian law, he is presumed innocent. But the investigation is open. Both the Royal Bahamas Police Force and the U.S. Coast Guard are actively working this case. Karli Aylesworth and her boyfriend Steve Hansen have given formal statements. They have retraced every step they can retrace. They are not going quietly. And out in those 4 miles of clear, shallow, heavily trafficked water between Elbow Cay and Marsh Harbor, the search continues. There is a photograph of Lynette that keeps appearing in coverage of this case. She is on the water. She is laughing. The sun is on her face. She looks exactly like who everyone who knew her says she was, a woman who had found her place in the world and was living in it as completely as she could. She pinned a shirt to the top of her social media profile that read, "Growing old disgracefully." She was 55 years old. She was a mother, a sailor, a diver, a paddleboarder. She had spent over a decade building a life on the open ocean with the man who is now the only witness to how she died. That man is back in the United States. She is still out there. The story Brian Hooker has told doesn't fit the geography. It doesn't fit the timeline. It doesn't fit the lanyard, or the paddleboards, or the green cover-up he forgot to mention, or the 8 to 10 hours that 4 miles of water has no explanation for. It doesn't fit what Ken felt in his chest when he did the math. 4 miles, 8 to 10 hours, no body, no answers, no charges, no end. Just a 45-foot sailboat sitting in a harbor with 2 paddleboards still strapped to its side, and a woman who loved the ocean, still out there in it somewhere. Lynette Hooker deserves answers. Her mother deserves answers. Her mother deserves answers. If you have any information about what happened on the water near Elbow Cay on the night of April 4th, 2026, the Royal Bahamas Police Force and the U.S. Coast Guard are still investigating. The case is open. The truth is still out there.